I really want to make sure folks understand that the importance of these connections with nature are really vital to our health and to our mental well-being. And I think we all realized and experienced that during COVID when we were kind of cooped inside and we all saw nature as our way of just kind of dealing with the mightiness of the situation. And so I think that, again, people, particularly those in Pennsylvania, being outdoors is a part of our story, part of our essence. And so we don't want to abandon or forget about those who are growing older and they just need a little help and support in connecting them to these benefits.
Imagine a place where stress fades, fresh air fills your lungs, and adventure awaits around every corner. Welcome to Think Outside, the podcast that inspires you to explore, connect, and embrace the outdoors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Think Outside with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. I'm your host, Marci Mowery. Today's episode is made possible via a grant from AARP Community Challenge Grant Program. The mission of the program is to make communities more livable for people of all ages with tangible improvements that jumpstart long-term change. Today, we're diving into an important and inspiring initiative, connecting to the outdoors as we age, as well as Aging Our Way, PA. Pennsylvania is one of the oldest states in the nation, and that's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. Aging Our Way in PA plan lays out a framework for ensuring that every older adult can age with dignity, independence, connection, and joy. Connecting to the outdoors as we age is a toolkit to help us enjoy nature and all of its benefits throughout our lifespan. To help us understand the vision, the work underway, and what it means for communities across the Commonwealth, we're joined by Nicole Faraguna, Director, Office of Planning and Policy with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Let's jump in. We're joined by Nicole Faraguna, Director, Office of Planning and Policy, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Welcome, Nicole. Great to have you with us.
Yes, thank you for focusing on this important issue. Very much appreciate it.
It is a very important issue. And before we get into the details of the plan, can you tell us a bit about what inspired you to become an advocate for aging and connecting older adults to nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think all of us are surrounded by people who we love, and we're all aging gracefully, hopefully.
Hopefully.
When, I would go along with my husband to visit his father, my father-in-law, Jack, in the nursing home. And, dating pre-COVID, we would go and have visits. And, Jack, was this Korean War veteran who, had a heart of gold, but could be surly at times. And when we would stop in to see him, he might have a bit of a, sourpuss on, and we would say, hey, how about going outside? And going outside meant that he could sit in the grass with a little bit of sun on his face, 2 graham cups on his lap, read the paper, and just feel that connection to nature. I mean, Jack was someone who hunted and fished all his life, had a garden for much of his adult life. And so going back in, we would take him back inside, refreshed and happy. And the other residents would ask, well, what is it like outside? We never get to go out. And the reality is that if you don't have a volunteer or a visitor, it really is very difficult because the staff simply don't have the capacity to take most of the residents outside, and talking about long-term care facilities, of course. And so, this to me, imagine a life, especially if you spent a good part of your life hiking, fishing, hunting, and now spent confined inside. What kind of quality of life is that? So what can we do as community, as a society, to support those who are growing older, who may be homebound or living in long-term care facilities, to feel the connection? And it's not just, we can talk about this, but there's there's so many reasons why this is important. And so it's not just, oh, I like to be outside, but it's a multitude of benefits of being outside.
You remind me of my own father when he was in a long-term care facility. And if we'd arrive and we couldn't find him, we would look outside because that's where he'd want to be the whole time. He'd like to sit by the gardens that they had. And he really enjoyed that time in the sun and that time just being in nature, listening to the birds and maybe poking around in the dirt on the raised bed gardens.
I think I provided you with a photo of Jack with our two pups on his lap, just alongside the Susquehanna River. And so when he was in this facility in Sunbury, of course, he was wheelchair bound at that point. And so we took him for a walk down to the river, and having, accessible sidewalks and having an accessible river walk made that possible, right? And again, for someone who was an angler all his life, it was really important for him to see the river again.
And I'm sure seeing your pups was really important to him too. That ability to be with animals. He was an outdoor lover and wildlife, and that connection to therapy dogs or our own pets is really important.
Oh, sometimes he was happier to see the dogs than he is to stuff.
I understand. So, this new plan, Aging Our Way in PA, what does it mean? And what does it mean for the state? And what does it mean for individuals?
So I don't want to take away from, the critical work that Department of Aging has done in developing their aging plan. Aging Our Plan is really intended to identify, all these core objectives and priorities, and really prioritizing older adults. And so what we tried to do is really identify where we, as DCNR, intersect with the Department of Aging, and also the statewide health improvement plan as well. So between Department of Health, Department of Aging, and DCNR's statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, we really tried to create linear and parallel connections where we see opportunities to strengthen accessibility, adaptability, and really supporting people who are growing older, but also those with disabilities, and really making an inclusive environment for those who want to enjoy nature. And so recently, we partnered with the Department of Aging and Department of Health to put together a toolkit, if you will. So Outdoors as We Age, Pennsylvania's RX for Nature is a guide that's really intended to, one, underscore the benefits of nature for older adults, helping to identify barriers and challenges. And most importantly, it's really trying to help us overcome those barriers and challenges. So it provides some helpful resources that helps to make it a little easier, creating meaningful connections to nature for older adults. But it's a first step. It's really intended to highlight the issues, really kind of reinforce the why. Why is it important for us to get older adults outdoors? And then hopefully working together across agencies, across partners, across community to help overcome some of those barriers and challenges.
I applaud the agencies, the interagency cooperation. When I was looking at some of the statistics, Pennsylvania is fifth in the nation, I believe, in terms of the percentage of the population that is considered to be seniors. But as you mentioned in the beginning, we all know somebody. We're all aging, and we all have family members that are might be older, might be not as active as they once were, but there are benefits to being in the outdoors, to being active. So two questions come to mind. Where can people find the toolkit? And, are there tools within the toolkit to help individuals if they have aging family members? So that's my first question. So
you can find the toolkit at our website, and it's dcnr.pa.gov, but we'll link the URL since our URL has recently changed. And so we'll make sure you have that for you.
Yeah, we can put that in the show notes.
Okay. And the idea, so what the toolkit does is provide some examples of how we can more easily connect older adults to the outdoors. So one, it really outlines a number of resources that exist. So for example, We mentioned that the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation has this really great program that helps provide, with the funding when it's available, you provide opportunities for transportation for those who might be living in long-term care facilities or in senior centers. And you gave us a really great example, and we profiled that example of a group being able to visit a state park because transportation is a huge barrier. It provides a list of organizations that you may be able to connect to locally, whether it's through environmental educators, conservation organizations, land trusts, who may be able to provide, some resources once you get onto the property to provide some adaptive learning opportunities, equipment, etc. It talks about some of the specific work that state parks and state forests are doing to create a more accessible and welcoming recreation opportunities for older adults. It also just lists a number of just kind of general resources that are available in the community across Pennsylvania for older adults, but also kind of nature-related kind of experiences.
And one of the things I mentioned at the beginning that this current episode is sponsored by a grant that we have from AARP. One of the things that the foundation is currently doing is we're working with libraries that have libraries of things and getting some things into those libraries that might help people continue to explore the outdoors. Like they could borrow a pair of trekking poles. They could borrow some binoculars, but giving them access to things that might help them continue to be active in nature. Or really, it doesn't matter what age you are if you don't have the tools, making those tools available to you. Pretty excited about that. So, what role do outdoor spaces and recreation play in healthy aging?
It's a great question, and honestly, DCNR sees outdoor space, outdoor experiences as an essential service in terms of how we are supporting and promoting quality of life and healthy living. And so there are numerous studies that reinforce why being outdoors for anyone, is important. And then there's studies that really reinforce the benefits for older adults or for those who may have specific conditions. It can help improve your immune system. It can help reduce stress, anxiety, overall improve overall mental health. As I mentioned with my father-in-law, it could be an hour spending some time outside, and his overall outlook on life improves. It helps improve happiness and well-being. Being outdoors can help reduce diastolic blood pressure and heart rate. It can even help reduce the risk of chronic illnesses, particularly for those who have the ability to be active and spend some time walking and biking. DCNR has, really been very thoughtful about our e-bike policy, for example, which is something that we feel is an accessibility tool, an opportunity for people to continue an activity that they enjoy doing. When we put out our e-bike policy for public comment a few years ago, we heard overwhelmingly from the public that accessibility is critical and important. And we want to be able to continue to do this activity with our grandkids or with our partner. And that hip injury or just the kind of general decline as we age doesn't want to keep us from being outside and enjoying those experiences. So there's, adaptability. There's so much we can do as an agency to improve opportunities. And we're doing it through our environmental educators as well, where we may provide activities for beginners or specific activities for older adults. So it's not just hey, we're going to teach you how to bird watch or tap that maple tree for maple syrup, but we're also going to provide you with the tools and the guide to take you out into the woods to feel safe, to make sure that the pathway is accessible, to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions, and you can learn along the way. So I think there's just so many ways that we're trying to build accessibility, adaptability into our work and mission. But with everything, there's still a lot of work to do.
You're using two words kind of interchangeably, adaptability and accessibility. Can you define for the listeners what you mean by each of those?
But when I think about accessibility, I think about a state park that has that level of ADA, American Disabilities Act has, specific requirements when we, think about accessibility. But when we think about it in terms of, is it wheelchair accessible? Can a wheelchair access a specific restroom or a specific amenity? What is the incline of the or slope of the trails? What are the width of the trails? So ensuring that when people come to a park or to a trail, that if they are using a mobility device, for example, they can actually access that trail. They can actually the parking lot and the trail are in close proximity. So those are all things, in terms of how we think about accessibility. Of course, there's so many more dimensions to that. There's the color viewfinders that we installed at certain state parks that allow people who may not be able to see the full spectrum of colors the opportunity to view and see fall foliage. There's the sensory gardens that we've developed that allow people with, neurodivergency or sensory issues that allow them to experience a much more in-depth experience through touching, through smelling, through a variety of different senses. And then adaptability is trying to support, again, the needs of those who may have specific physical restrictions, and thinking about it in terms of how do we create an experience that allows them to have, an equitable experience. So is it an adaptive kayak launch that allows someone who can who might be in a wheelchair, who might be easily able to access or to get into a kayak using this adaptive launch? And, as our Secretary Dunn always points out, that a lot of these accessibility and adaptability measures make it easier for everyone. It's a much better experience, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. You began talking about your father-in-law and mentioned the fact that a lot of time when people are homebound or in long-term care facilities, they are particularly underserved when it comes to access to nature. You mentioned transportation as being one of those barriers. What are some of the thoughts as how we can remove those barriers, and how we can reconnect people that are in these long-term care facilities or who no longer are driving, who are homebound, to nature in some way?
It's a big question. And I think and transportation is only one piece of it. So when you were talking about people, particularly those who are living in long-term care facilities, you have a breadth of challenges and hurdles. And so you may have someone, as I mentioned, who is wheelchair bound. So we need transportation that ensures that we can, provide that level of accessibility. You may have someone who requires medication at a frequent level. You may have someone who has cognitive decline, and we need to make sure that we have additional staffing or volunteers to provide support. I don't think these are challenges that we can't necessarily overcome, but it requires a village, right? It requires community coming together and saying, we're going to make this a priority. So, there's a number of elements to this. So, one aspect, as we mentioned earlier, is just creating safe places for people to come to. So if you are as I mentioned, we had the ability to take Jack to the Sunbury River Park, and we were fortunate that there was a relatively accessible pathway from the long-term care facility to the river. Having those kinds of sidewalks that are accessible without, bumps and grooves and all of that is really important. And there's conversations around that. That's happening through active transportation plans. And we have a great partnership with the Department of Health and DCD and the Pennsylvania Downtown Center when it comes to how we are trying to really elevate and prioritize safe pathways to parks and trails. Then you have the people capacity issue. And so is there an opportunity for us to build a volunteer core around connecting older adults to the outdoors? And when you think about it, the volunteers that work in our state parks and volunteer on our trails tend to be older adults. I mean, these are people who have now found themselves, with lots of time on their hands and still wanting to do the things that they love. And we are very grateful for that. We are grateful to have them, supporting and working in our open space and in our parks and forests. So maybe there's an opportunity using a senior core or an RSVP core to perhaps establish a specific team of volunteers who are trained to take older adults outside and spend some time with them. That could be amazing. The other piece is bringing nature inside. And we talk about this in the toolkit as well. And so for those who may not have the ability to get outside frequently, especially in the winter months, let's face it, winter in Pennsylvania can be a little rough, as can summer be rough. And so maybe there's opportunities for environmental educators or volunteers to come in and do nature activities inside long-term care facilities and senior centers as well. And maybe it's an opportunity for people to, touch nature elements, or virtual reality is another way that people can experience nature. They can hear it, they can feel it, they can see it, and it's giving them some of the same benefits without necessarily being outside. So there are ways that we can potentially lessen the barriers, and as we're kind of working together towards these same goals.
Is there an example of a facility that is implementing programs that is highlighted in the toolkit that people might read about, so that, sometimes when your loved ones are in a place, if you can point to something that other people are doing, it might inspire a facility to adapt a new policy or a new program?
So there are a number of examples of this. In fact, in the beginning of our research, we surveyed a number of facilities just to get a sense of how they prioritize outdoor experiences for their residents. And again, we heard from them in terms of some of the challenges and barriers, but we also heard from them in terms of how they were overcoming some of those challenges and actually providing these types of programs. And so one of the really, I think, successful programs is just an outdoor gardening program, an adaptive gardening experience where you have raised beds, people can come out and stand, or they can have chairs, they can play in the dirt, they can plant vegetables and flowers, they can take the flowers in and they can, benefit and see their beauty throughout the day. So, those are relatively easy programs. What we learned is that not all facilities have easy access to the outdoors. So some are very wealthy in terms of their natural surroundings, and others just may not have or have very limited. And so that's where those kind of field trip excursions could be really beneficial in getting people, to local parks or state parks. And again, that requires a bit of a concerted effort to help and support that. But it is happening. There's a few examples that we've pinpointed in the guide as you take a look at that. And like I said, with the outreach we've been doing, just really trying to understand, how facilities are continuing to do this work. And post-COVID, we're also we're well post-COVID, but there's still the challenge that nursing facilities have experienced in terms of staffing and volunteers. And so I'm not sure if they've fully kind of filled those gaps over the years. And so that's still something that they're working through. So doing a podcast like this and reinforcing the need and the benefits is really important, because maybe people can think about how they can support those living in their local facilities.
Or even a neighbor, perhaps there's somebody in your neighborhood who would benefit from a visit for, maybe you can help them get on a walk, advocate for safe streets for them to move about. Advocate, I live near a park that has put in some smooth walkways and some gardens and some, they call that, there's swings where you can sit, not like a swing set, but, bench swings where you can sit and have conversations. And they're in use all the time by multi-generations. It's not just for seniors, but, people go there and they sit and they swing and they have conversations. So, don't just think of it from a facilities perspective, but what changes can be made in your neighborhood? How can you reach out to somebody in your neighborhood that could benefit from spending a little time outside? And I was reading recently about a library that takes people on hikes in nature and they film them, and then they play the hikes in the local senior center. So that those who aren't able to participate can still get the benefit of being in the outdoors, having that virtual experience, which has many of the same benefits of actually being in the outdoors.
I heard of a similar situation where you had a facility that may take the residents out for walks, and then they'll collect leaves or acorns or different elements of nature, along with some photographs, and then to take them back and share them with other residents. So I think it's a great way to get people to feel the experience, but those who may not be able to get outside themselves.
Yeah, I love the ideas. So like bring your creativity on, about how can we connect people through a variety of ways to the outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned the color correcting viewfinders. I was taking some notes, and one of the things that we've been doing, the viewfinders are amazing. They're in 9 locations, and we'll link to them in the show notes. But they're also now color correcting goggles, and we're putting those into some of the parks and the forest districts so that you can borrow them and take them. Maybe it's in your community. Yeah, you go out and you look. They're going to be in some of the libraries. And I also think about not just fall foliage, but the colors of spring are so amazing to bring that accessibility where somebody can enjoy the full spectrum of colors is pretty cool.
I love that. Yes. I mean, the spring wildflowers in particular, and, sometimes you have to hunt for them in the forest, but I love that idea. That's great.
Yeah. If there's one thing that you would like people to remember from listening to this podcast, what would it be?
Again, I really want to make sure folks understand that the importance of these connections with nature are really vital to our health and to our mental well-being. And I think we all realized and experienced that during COVID, when we were kind of cooped inside, and we all saw nature as our way of just kind of dealing with the mightiness of the situation. And so I think that, again, people, particularly those in Pennsylvania, being outdoors is a part of our story, part of our essence. And so we don't want to abandon or forget about those who are growing older, and they just need a little help and support in connecting them to these benefits. And I think that there are really great examples of again, overcoming some of these barriers. And if you have ideas, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to link my email into the chat, because I would love to talk to people. And I've been doing presentations with recreational therapists and medical professionals in long-term care facilities and environmental educators, and really feel like we're starting the conversation. And again, it takes a community, a society to really overcome some of these challenges. But I think, let's work on a pilot project and show how it can be done and why it's important for us to invest in these kinds of efforts.
Thank you, Nicole. I applaud the state for working interdepartmentally, but also, developing the toolkit, developing a blueprint to really looking at this very large population of Pennsylvania and creating quality of life throughout our lifespan. That is so important. So thank you for the work that you and your colleagues are doing to ensure that for all Pennsylvanians.
I would also just note that, DCNR, again, lots of work to be done, but there is a lot of work being done right now. So one of the things that we just accomplished is within our state parks websites is an accessibility page for each state park. And so it does list the specific amenities and resources that are available and provides some detail for those who might be looking to visit a state park. We just had a really great event back in September with the Department of Military and Veterans Administration to provide veterans and members of the public to experience the outdoors through a forest bathing experience. And that was really intended to build awareness around Suicide Prevention Month and reinforce the health and wellness benefits. So that's something we're hoping to do every year and expand beyond the 3 parks that we did. That we held that event this year. And of course, the mosaic work that we're doing here at DCNR is a way for us to really build awareness within our own staff and help them to better understand the variety and the various dimensions of diversity. And the important part of this work is ensuring our staff is using the right terminology and understanding the specific needs when it comes to serving all Pennsylvanians. So like I said, there's still a lot more work to be done, but there's such a great opportunity for us to work across agencies and with our partners. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to highlight this issue.
Yes. And I think we're going to have to define mosaic for our listeners, because mosaic can be artwork, but in your case, it has a very different meaning. So if you could define that.
So mosaic is DCNR's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. And it's really intended both internally and externally to better understand and serve the various dimensions of diversity, ensure that we are supporting our visitors, supporting our staff and our partners in terms of how we serve and building those connections. And so there's a strong educational component to that, which I think is really important, particularly when we're talking about older adults, because that might not necessarily, to some, they might not think about that in terms of the lens of diversity, but it is something that we need to consciously think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading the statewide comprehensive outdoor rec plan, and one of the barriers was safety. And part of the definition of safety was, access to water, being hydrated, and too much sun exposure. Our definitions change as we grow older, or different stages of our lifespan. I think it's really important that we're having these conversations.
Absolutely, and that's a good point, because we have an overlapping action item across the Aging Our Way and our SCORP, our outdoor recreation plan, where we're saying we need to make sure we have shaded benches where people can just sit and enjoy nature, right?
Yeah.
To have trails that are accessible, but along those trails, we need to make sure that there are places where people can enjoy the beauty and not have overexposure to the sun.
Yeah.
Which, obviously can have,
some serious health complications. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that the events that you did in September, are there any templates that if, a community group or motivated volunteers would be interested in doing different types of things? Are those in the toolkit? Are there other places that people could go for templates to do something similar?
That's a great question. I think that we do provide some basic recommendations in the toolkits. I think, one suggestion is, going to the community itself and just really helping to understand what their needs are. So if you want to do an event for veterans, then talk to those in the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, talk to someone at a Veterans Affairs facility and, coordinate with them directly. A senior center is the same thing. If you have an interest, I think talking to those people who are serving that population, they're going to be the experts in terms of how that event is planned and ensuring that you're, working to fulfill their needs.
Great advice. Again, Nicole, thank you for joining us today to talk about the toolkit and to help us explore this aging in Pennsylvania and how we go about it and keep our connection to nature and help people connect to something that, referring back to SCORP again, 82% of the people that were surveyed said their number one reason for going into the outdoors was for their mental well-being. So it's something we all benefit from. So thank you for helping to illuminate our listeners, and the things that we reference, we will link to in our show notes, and we will put your contact information in there too, Nicole, so people can reach out if they have ideas or thoughts or opportunities that could be good partnerships for the department.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Think Outside, where every episode invites you to discover new places, build confidence, and find inspiration in nature. Love the show? Subscribe for more inspiration, share with a fellow explorer, and let's keep thinking outside together. For more resources and inspiration, visit thinkoutside.podcast.org.